May I begin by thanking the fantastic Bill team, some of whom may be listening to our proceedings this afternoon, because this piece of work is one that it was extremely difficult to do and to pull together, and the hard work they put into achieving it and to doing it in a timely way shows, it has to be said, the British Civil Service at its best. And I'm sometimes quite critical of the British Civil Service, so it's nice to be able to put on record and in Hansard my grateful thanks to the really deeply impressive work that's been done on this piece of legislation that is being enormously overinterpreted by the benches opposite. And it has to be said, as my honourable friend the Minister did, mainly by people who never wanted to leave the European Union anyway. And I thought it was rather marvellous that the honourable gentleman, the member for Stirling, thought that it was going to expand into a black hole. I think the laws of physics are being rewritten by the opponents of Brexit, because as far as I'm aware, things don't expand in black holes. That's rather the point of them. They are sucked in, and even light is trapped by the gravity. So there is a misconception opposite in so many ways when we get to this bill and the amendments that are in front of it. And the amendments themselves are deeply confused because, on the one hand, there's a concern that this is a great power grab. This enormously powerful state will snatch power away from the House of Parliament. On the other hand, they want the regulations to be extended. Well, either it's a great power grab, all the regulations should be extended. It can't be both. And the truth is that it is mainly technical. What it is doing is correcting our statute book so that we no longer have laws that refer to European regulations that may themselves have been repealed or amended. So we have currently rules that are based on things that are either out of date or possibly even no longer exist. That is no basis for our statute book. That is a technical, tidying up operation which will apply to the regulations that are kept. But it's also technical, if we look at 4 and 5, in terms of ensuring that our law has one base, that the validity of, speaking loosely, UK law, and obviously there's Scots law and English and Welsh law and Northern Irish law, has its own individual base without EU law principles, a civil code approach influencing, upsetting and confusing it. And that applies both to the principle of supremacy of EU law and the general principles of EU law and the ability of our courts to revisit earlier judgments so that they are based on what we can loosely call UK law. This is an extremely sensible approach to take. The SNP, as so often, gets very confused in the European debate because it wants, and it makes its case for, greater sovereignty for Scotland until it hands it all over to the European Union. So the SNP wants independent from the Westminster Parliament, which they make a very noble contribution, and I see the former leader in his place, who made a very fine contribution to this House as leader. They make a contribution here, but they want to leave here to hand it to Brussels. This seems to me the definition of eccentricity, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and something that does not have a logical base. And what this bill does is give power to the devolved authorities. They will be able to take retained EU law and do with it as they please. They can keep it, yes. They will be able to revoke it, they can amend it, but they can't extend it. Now, why can't it be extended? This is a point that has been raised and is one that people have some concern about. Because this is technical. This is turning the status quo into domesticated law. If people want to make the political argument for extending laws, they have the abilities to do that where that is devolved. They have the power to do it, but it is not this bill. Likewise, in this Parliament, if we wish to extend the regulations, we have the ability to do it. And that comes on to the entirely spurious point about... Of course, I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful, but I hope you would understand the point that, of course, there's a difference. We wish to be back in the European Union as an independent country, but by dint of this bill, we're going to have to introduce legislation to make sure that we remain aligned with the European Union. We have no desire to do that because we're already closely aligned, and what is happening is that this is going to be forced on us against our will by this Parliament.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the right honourable gentleman makes a fair point that there is going to be some work for the Scottish Parliament to do to maintain the status quo. That is a policy decision for the Scottish Parliament from a decision that was taken by the whole of the United Kingdom. But that is how devolution works, and that is a proper working of devolution and a fair working of devolution. That actually is what gives the Scottish Parliament the power to do what it wants to do. It flows from our constitutional settlement and from the overarching decision made by the British people as one people to leave the European Union. But I was just coming on to the entirely bogus point about the threat to rights. My honourable friend, the member for Watford, in his opening speech in the second reading, made it clear on behalf of the government that the environmental rights were going to be maintained. That is something the government has been committed to and is committed to, but it will maintain them in UK law. And we have been able to do this before. I believe Henry Brooke was the Home Secretary who introduced the Clean Air Act in the 1950s. The Conservative Party has a pretty good record on this. It turns out that the 1893 Sale of Goods Act, which I referenced earlier to the Minister, was one of the last acts of Gladstone. So the Liberals should be proud of their history of doing things in a British way rather than needing the European Union to do it. The 1938 Holidays with Pay Act. Again, the protection of worker rights. And this is before we go back to Lord Shaftesbury and the Factory Acts. We don't need to go into the mists of time to see that we can do it for ourselves. And then finally, I must mention the amendment on the list that is needed, because this is really the man upon the stair. We all know about the man upon the stair. Yesterday, upon the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd go away. If we don't know what our laws are, how are people supposed to obey them? If the laws are unknown, mystic, possibly imaginary, surely they shouldn't be laws in the first place. They have made the best argument for getting rid of the man upon the stair who wasn't there in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.